Hello, everybody. So, for those of you who don't know me, I'm Kevin Cain. I'm Russ's son, and I'm going to turn things over to Kathleen Cain, who is Russ's daughter and my sister, in a few moments. And I just wanted to thank everyone for coming. We've got people who've come all the way. Bernie came from, and Carol came from D.C. We have about 10 people who've come from the Bay Area, people who've come from L.A. We've got a good complement. Of course, lots of people from the Monterey Bay Area too. So my purpose in being here is just to welcome you and to say that if you need anything or want to join the ceremony, we're going to have some speakers. You're more than welcome to come up after and speak too. So don't feel that the speaker order in the program is dictating who can speak. Anyone who wants to can come up, and we don't have so many people that will be here all day. So thanks again, and let me introduce Kathy.
Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for coming. I know that I would have liked to have met everybody in the same situation with my dad here. It would have been nice. It would have been nice to hear all the stories and to meet you all individually, but I don't think he would have stood for that. I think he would have really resisted that, so I'm glad we can finally do it. Thank you so much for being here and enjoying the beautiful day. And I guess the first speaker we have is Bernie Lunzer.
Well, I was going to say, too, that Russ would hate everything about this. About 2 years ago, we gave him a standing ovation at a meeting for all the things that he had done, just even in the last 5 years. And he turned beet red, and you could just tell that he didn't like it. He didn't like it. Russ had done so much for us, and I sometimes feel bad about maybe we took too much of Russ, and so I appreciate what we got of Russ. The thing of it is that he was so generous, and he was always trying to solve my problem, not his. And one thing I remember about Russ is that I couldn't get him off the phone, and I guess I really understand why now, because mostly when you talk to people, they wait till the last minute in a conversation to say what it is they're after, their agenda. Well, Russ didn't have his own agenda, so he never knew how to finish that phone call. But he was also a fellow nerd, and he probably understood technology and abused it in ways that no one else really could. He helped us with things and got things done that we're still looking for some passwords, I should add, too, if anybody knows those passwords. But more than anything, what I'll remember is a very generous man that never thought of himself and always was there for us. We will miss him, and he's the kind of person that will be missed by a lot of individual people, certainly within the Guild, and I can see here today far beyond the Guild. So, thanks.
Thank you very much. So we have Jim Nakashima next. Jim. The two grandpas.
I don't know many of you. In fact, I probably don't know any of you, except for a few. I got to know Russ in the last 4 to 5 years. In the last 2 years, we had significant discussions about life, the beauty of it, the change in the world, stories about reporters, which one day I'll tell, if he ever really wanted it. But the real reason I'm up here, because I think he gave me a message to give to his children. And that was a rare thing for him to talk so candidly. I called him the quiet warrior, because that's what he was. And what he did was he gave me a rundown of every one of his children with their skills. I don't think many of you, while you've seen him at work, I don't think he truly understood the genius that he really was, or appreciated, because he never showed it. And he liked to think that it passed on to his children. each with their specific talents, skills, and the beauty that he wished to have imparted to them, both genetically and by his actions. With Kevin, you were the visionary. He said that you could see things others couldn't see, and you could take something with technology or electronics and make it into a reality that people could understand. He liked to think that that came from him too, because he wanted to be part of that dream. To Paul, his love for you was based on the fact that music was his soul. That's what kept his mind at peace. Opera, and you gave it to him. But he said, my God, you know, he has the perfect pitch. He can play so many instruments. And he understands the mathematics of how to make music dance. It was a beautiful statement for him to understand his own children that way. I looked at Paul in a different way. He can take a piece of wood and make a piece of art. He can build things. But he always saw the picture in his mind. That was his genius, and he gave him his music. To Kat, he says, Kat took my vision. He took my eyes. She can take a picture and take it the way I took it, where the pictures told the story. He says, pictures don't lie. When you develop them, they lie. But he says, pictures in its raw state. That's why he never really tried to fix up a picture. He let it be what the picture said. And he said it makes it easy on the reporters if the picture can tell more than the reporters can. And then finally, his grandchildren. With Aiden, he said to me, he says, he's got everything that it takes to be a success in life. He's smart. Okay? He's disciplined in his own way. He says he couldn't be better than I could hope for. And he hoped that he was able to be part of your life. And he was. To Autumn, he said you were the quiet one. And your skills and intelligence was in a different direction, but my God, you had those skills. And then the last 2 years, we joined forces to know about my granddaughter. His granddaughter was Pele. And he held Pele so tight. And he loved her so much that he knew he could make everything okay. As you can see, we had our coffees. And I think he wanted me to tell this story for you all to understand his family, his children. Because it was pretty special to him. Because he left a big part of himself to that. To the rest of you, he left his professionalism, his skills, his love. He made me appreciate what unions were about. The difference of mission, which we all agreed to. He had a lot of respect. And even now, I pick up the phone to call him and ask him, hey, do you think that you can help me pick something out? Because I always knew that he'd lead me in the right direction. And I have to catch myself. So every day, I do shed a tear that he's not here, as you all will. But one thing I will promise him is that his grandchildren will never forget him. And I hope you guys, I'm sure, will not forget him. Thank you.
Thank you, Jim. So next we have Suzanne Arnott. She is right there.
I'm the emotional one, so if I start crying, bear with me. I'm actually here to speak for Luther Jackson, who was the executive officer of the San Jose Newspaper Guild for many, many years, and I worked for the Guild for 43 years, so I knew Russ from the day he walked through our door and said, I've got a good organizing job for you guys in Monterey, and he never, ever let us down, and he was my rock for 43 years, or 40 years of my 43-year career with the Guild. But Luther, unfortunately, could not be here today because he had plans to see his elderly mother in New York with his son and couldn't change his plans. But he wrote some words and asked me to speak them for him. So this is from Luther. I'm sorry I was not able to be with you today. My son Martin and I are in New York visiting my mother. I don't think Russ would have approved of our mode of transportation. Why fly to New York when you could take the train? There's a lot to say about Russ. He was the perfect local union leader. He was an excellent newspaper photographer who always brought a great deal of skill, dignity, and professionalism to his work. He was a compassionate, tough-minded, and tireless advocate for union members. He was well known and respected in the community. Intellectually, Russ was a genius, pure and simple. He was a Renaissance man in the Da Vinci mold. He had a restless intellect that was manifested by constant tinkering, inventing, and questioning. In that way, he was like Mozart or Ellington, never satisfied with rote or repetition. But fortunately, Russ was quite generous with his intellect. I learned so much from him. I thought I knew something about trains until I met Russ. I love the description in Carl Hall's brilliant tribute to Russ of how he was cleverly able to combine a train or mass transit experience with many of the union meetings he attended. Russ was overjoyed when Caltrain extended its commuter service south to Gilroy. Now he had a new way of getting to San Francisco for meetings. And Russ was probably one of the first folks in the Bay Area to get a Clipper card, allowing riders to transfer from one mode of transportation to another without having to constantly dig in your pocket for change. I thought I knew something about opera until I met Russ. His enthusiasm and knowledge were infectious, and he was principally responsible for turning me, a lover of Mozart and Handel, into a huge fan of the Ring, a ring nut. I will never forget attending the San Francisco Opera 2011 Ring production with my son Alex, Russ, Kevin, and Megan. This was Russ at his finest, bow tie and all. We even had dinner at Max's Opera Cafe and sat a few tables away from several of the cast members. As a parent, I am always looking for role models to guide me. Again, Russ taught me a thing or two. I am thankful for the way he loved and appreciated Kathy, Paul, and Kevin as unique individuals. Nita said that Russ took them to the opera as they were growing up, but he selected specific operas that he knew each of them would enjoy, those that fit their distinct interests. The proof of Russ's parenting prowess is on display with you today. Paul, Kevin, and Kathy are all incredibly accomplished, and I have so enjoyed getting to know them. When we lose someone, of Russ's compassion, intellect, and energy, it's natural to wonder how we're going to fill this huge void. My suggestion is that we all pledge to become a little more Russ-like. Here are 3 things on my list. Number 1, I will ride more trains, and I will use my Clipper card whenever possible. 2, I will attend more operas, and when I'm in San Francisco, I'll dine at Max's whenever possible. 3, I will get to know my sons a little better and love and honor them as unique individuals. I am so thankful for Russ's dry wit, loyal friendship, and selfless service to multiple communities. He will continue to be a beacon for all of us. And that concludes what Luther had to say. I'd like to just add for myself that Russ was more than just a colleague for me. He was my friend for 40 years. And I learned of his illness when I was retiring 2 years ago, but he would never acknowledge it to me. That was Russ. He wasn't going to ruin my retirement party, even though he came out of the hospital to see me, and that's my first thinking that he was ill. But, you know, whenever I needed Russ, he was there. When we shut down the Guild office, which was pretty emotional for me after 43 years working for the Guild, it was Russ that helped me turn out the light. You know, the famous Mary Tyler Moore scene at the last thing where they turn out the lights, that was Russ for me. He was there no matter what time of the day or night I needed him. I could call him anytime, and I vented many times for him, with him. And let me tell you, trying to teach this old dog new tricks, and someone who resisted change like I did when the computer age came into the thing, he would just say, be patient with me, Suzanne. Or be patient, Suzanne, you'll get it, you'll get it. Eventually I did, but obviously I didn't get enough because my screensaver still has the Guild logo on it. I still don't know the password other than my first cat, Shazam. If anybody wants to get my computer, it's Shazam. And so if any of you know some of Russ's cat's names, there's a couple I can't get into, and I'm thinking it must be one of his dearly beloved cats. He would never acknowledge to me that he had a cat. You know, Russ kind of, yeah. I hear meowing when I would call him. Do you have a cat, Russ? No, I don't have a cat. And yet, I would hear this cat meowing, but he never wanted to show this softer side of himself, I think, and acknowledge it. But we shared a love of cats. Unfortunately, I didn't inherit his love of opera, but I'm going to try. I'm going to try. That's what I'm doing for Russ. And hopefully I will find someone who can come over and change my sign-on so that I can get into some of the programs that I haven't been able to for the last few years. So Russ, you're always right here in my heart, always will be. Thank you.
Thank you, Suzanne. So next we have Frank's, well, Luther was already represented. Frank Sweeney.
Hello. I was privileged to know Russ as a great friend and a Guild colleague for 39 years. It goes back to 1974 when I was nominated to be vice president of the San Jose Newspaper Guild. It was at a membership meeting, and Russ was there. As I recall, they'd just gotten their first contract in Monterey, and at the time it was the best first-year contract in Newspaper Guild history. Russ was always thinking 2 or 3 steps ahead of the next guy, which is why he was so successful in what he did. And he served as vice president of our local in 1980. He was president for 2 years, in 84 and 85. He was on the International Executive Board of the Guild, and he was a longtime president of the Newspaper Guild's Western District Council. He was an institution in that. One of his legacies, as you've heard, is the computer. Russ brought San Jose into the computer age, followed that up by bringing the international into the computer age, and helped countless other locals, I don't know how many, enter the computer age. And I think, although I'm not sure, I think he was self-taught in the computer. I don't think he ever took a class. Russ was a force at Newspaper Guild conventions. He was an expert on parliamentary procedure, and I learned so much about parliamentary procedure from Russ. I spent 23 years as secretary-treasurer of the San Jose Newspaper Guild, and all that time I always believed that Russ would do a better job. Problem was, he was in Monterey, the Guild office was in San Jose, 90 miles away, and somebody had to sign checks every week. And so that wasn't very practical. So I ended up signing about 30,000 checks over the years, and Russ stayed down here. Conventions were mentioned, and train rides were mentioned. We all know Russ was a big train buff. But he liked to experience these things. After the 1983 convention in Cleveland, Russ and I hopped on Cleveland's brand new Shaker Heights trolley to ride it to the end of the line and ride it back just to see what it was. In 1988, at Vancouver convention, we arrived a day early so we could take a boat ride from Vancouver up to the little town of Squamish to ride a steam train back to Vancouver. Made a nice little introduction to Vancouver. We also, I think we all know how Russ worked so hard at everything he did. He was legendary for getting along with very little sleep. And I remember at the 1993 Guild Convention in Honolulu, my wife Sharon and I arrived at the hotel, and first person we see is Russ, and he says, go down to Ala Moana Shopping Center to this little store and pick up this big box of paper. Oh, really? What are we doing with it? He said, we're going to produce a newspaper. So I took the bus down there, picked up a big box, brought it back. The idea was, it was a political year, as every other year was in those days, and the idea was to just have some straight information out there, not tainted by political arguments among all the blizzard of things that were left at delegates' seats. So there were 4 of us working on this, 3 reporter types and Russ. And each night, after all the convention activities were done, we would go to Russ's room, and 3 of us would write stories, and then Russ would do the layout on the computer, we'd write the headlines, and then he would spend the rest of the night printing several hundred copies with a very slow rental printer, 1993 vintage. We put out 3 issues, but I remember the last issue because we hadn't been getting any sleep, and the rest of it had gotten even less. And it got so bad, I sat down at Russ's computer to try and write the story I was writing, and I couldn't stay awake. Finally, I had to stand up, and one of the other guys sat down, and I dictated my story. It was the only way I could get it out. And then Russ was printing all night long. But for 3 mornings at the convention, there was a newspaper, one sheet, double-sided as I recall, but it was there for every convention delegate to find out what happened at the seminars they missed, the candidates' debates, or anything like that. That was Russ. He was, I never thought he'd ever wear out. He was just so indestructible. Thank you.
Thank you, Frank. Next, we have Carl Hall. Thank you.
Well, hi, everybody. I'm the executive officer of the Pacific Media Workers Guild, which is the guild local that Russ really helped build more than just about anybody else. He knew how to do everything that I don't know how to do. And when I got this job, he was really the guy that allowed it to happen. I mean, everything that I didn't know how to do, he would do it. I mean, the database, the computer system, the network, the way the meetings are supposed to run, all that kind of thing, the budgeting. So I was always feeling a little bit guilty about not paying him. And, I just want to say to the family, I tried to pay him. I practically took the money out of my wallet and said, take it. He wouldn't, I don't even think he'd ever let me pick up the tab for lunch. And, he'd take the train up to San Francisco, the Caltrain station there at Townsend. It's a pretty good walk, it's about a half-hour better walk to the guild office, and I drive right by there. I told him, I'll pick you up. No! He would refuse to take a ride back to the train station or to be picked up. So I also want to just confess to the family that when I heard that he was ill, when he told me, and this took a lot of prying, like Suzanne says. I mean, it wasn't easy to get him to admit there was something going on. He said, well, I got to level with you. it's cancer, it's stage 4, and there is no stage 5. You know, I said, well, that sounds kind of serious. I just have to confess that I was upset, not just because of him, but because of my own void here. I mean, how's this union going to survive? I mean, I really thought, I can't do it, you know, I really can't. You know, I'm a newspaper reporter. What do I know about any of this stuff? Despite his illness, which I had very little sense of, you know, really what he was going through. He never would say, you know, that he was having any kind of discomfort. I asked him several times, in fact, you know, like, well, this chemo, that's probably kind of difficult, isn't it? No. He would never admit. He said, no. I said, well, you know, your radiation, doesn't that sting a little? No. We just joke about it, you know, but he seemed to be impervious to complaint or really, as has been remarked here, any kind of vulnerability to those sort of mortal things, and, you know. Another confession, at some point, you know, we realized, I guess, that, you know, I call Russ, something's not working. And, you know, and by the way, coming down here today, we had a little trouble finding it. We joked in the car, you know, we got to call Russ. How do you find this place? You know, the GPS doesn't seem to recognize the address. You know, I would call him, and like the cat that Suzanne would hear, I'd hear these hospital sounds in the background. And I'd say, are you in the hospital? No, no. What's the problem? Well, you know, do this or that. You know, you might say he left a pretty big void there for me, and you know, I feel a bit selfish about it. You know, he was the you know, the one who made everything work. I got a message from another friend of Russ's named Wayne Cahill. I'm not gonna read it, but we're gonna publish it on the MediaWorkers.org website. We also ran an obituary about Russ. Wayne was he was the administrative officer in Hawaii, Philadelphia, and I think he ran in Seattle too, right? And in all three of those places, and this is detailed in Wayne's 3-page tribute, Russ really did for Wayne exactly what he did for me. He just made it work. You know, whatever had to be done, and we didn't know how to do, he would do it. And in the same way, he never seemed to want to be paid. He never really seemed to complain about working all night long. Any kind of urgency or in your voice or something, or some need to get it done now, and he would never complain about being pushed or something like that. You know, I do thank the family for what must have been the sacrifice that you had to endure for him to show that kind of dedication. And it's you know, as people have said, it's difficult to kind of figure out, you know, what we're going to do now. I can say that his password for many accounts was Logefire. I'm sure many of you will want to write that down. I'm not sure where that comes from.
Wagner. It's a Wagner reference.
Is that, I was going to say it's probably from Wagner. Maybe you can...
Loga.
Logafira. It should be Logafoira then.
That's right.
But, well, all right. Is that from The Ring or Lohengrin?
The Ring.
Okay. Well, you learn something every day. I'm glad that we cleared that up. I say that it's true even now that I still don't know how to get into some of these accounts and how we're going to deal with the database and, you know, certain technical things that we're going to have to figure out. I mean, just as a taste of that, I printed out the domain names. These are the domain names that Russ had on, I think, his personal account. These were all, he paid for these on his own credit card. He never billed me for this. if I had known this, I would have insisted on paying him, but I never saw a bill. You know, I'm going to figure out how much this is, and we'll donate it to the charity that the family recommends, in some sort of guilt, not like in Godfrey, but some way to get rid of the guilt and everything. I'll send him a check, maybe, or something like that. But he has here probably 30 domain names that he paid for, just in case we ever needed them. One of them is one that I happened to mention this in the car coming down here. I had this bright idea to start a labor news service, and I was telling Russ about this bright idea I had to start a labor news service. And we had, I'm an old wobbly, you know, one big union. And we had an organizing drive in the East Bay. We called it One Big Bang, One Guild Universe. So I was thinking one big something, one big news service. That'd be a good name for a news service. And I was telling Russ this, and you know, unbeknownst to me, it's on the list. OneBigNewsService.org. I too thought I knew a little bit about opera. You know, I'm not like this crowd. You know, I mean, like Logefire. I didn't know that was from Wagner. You know, I did go to that ring cycle that Luther mentioned. And, you know, I mean, I'm such a country bumpkin. You know, I was like, wow, Traviata. And Russ was like, oh, that's chestnuts. He's talking about, you know, St. Francis and operas like that. I mean, he was way above the average in just about everything that he did. I mean, he invented the computer system of the union that represents computer communications professionals. He invented that, really. I mean, he did. There was no knowledge in our ranks of networks and modern computer-based communications, and he brought that in. And still to this day, really is the architect for the system that we use, and how we're going to figure that out, I do not know. I just thought I'd, you know, thank everybody for his friends and family for, you know, tolerating his absence. I'm sure he was there for you too, but I mean, so many times I called him. He must have been having dinner or something. Was he always running up from?
He didn't eat dinner.
He never ate dinner.
Never ate anything.
I thought I'd just end here by announcing that we're going to, in August, I think, at the Guild meeting in San Francisco, rename name it. We have a student program, and we run scholarships for students, and we run a summer program for journalism students. We try to educate the student journalists that you actually should get paid for doing this kind of work. And Russ was a very big fan of that idea, that we need to educate the children, like these children here. Get paid for your work. You're worth it. And that's really what, you know, the union's about. It's about demanding respect in what you're worth, okay? That's what it's about. And that's what Russ was about. So we're gonna rename the scholarship program, the student program, after Russ, and we're going to put up in the Guild office this photograph that Frank Sweeney took, I think, right, Frank? And it's getting framed now and everything, and we'll put that up in the office. I thought I'd, you know, besides just apologizing and everything, saying thank you and everybody to everybody, make it's a commitment. You know, the work that Russ did was sort of the prosaic kind of work, but and it's sort of the, you know, I guess you might say the unrecognized kind of work, the stuff that happens, nobody sees it, but it's driven by the poetry. That's what drives it. You know, it's not just some bureaucratic requirement or something that was driving him. There was nothing about, you know, some sort of obligation there. It was driven by some kind of poetic, musical faith in doing the right thing. So, I thought that it might be appropriate to make a commitment to the family that we're not going to quit. The students will keep it going. If we can't, somebody will figure out the password if it's not Logefire. We'll find a way through probably the darkest hours of the union business. I mean, I joke around, if you want to put two words together that spell trouble, try newspaper union. We have to somehow, like it was said before, become more Russ-like and just get the work done and not give in to the weakness, I guess, or something that makes you just kind of want to hang it up. He would never do that, so we're going to keep the Newspaper Guild going at least through the end of August, and I think the students and maybe even the people here will assist with this. I think the ultimate tribute to Russ Cain is just to keep a social justice movement going in our piece of the American economy. It's a real honor to be here. Thank you all very much.
Thank you, Carl. Well, I guess we're going to have Paul as the last formal speaker, and anybody else who wants to come up and say anything is welcome to. Come on over, Paul.
This is what Dad would have been doing this entire time. There we go. I love his avatar. Dad's avatar on Facebook. Yeah. So I'm batting cleanup, and I'm gonna start at the beginning. So this is the end of the speech. You can come up after I'm done if you want to say a few words. There'll be a time for that. But he has a sister in Holyoke, Washington, where he grew up, and she wasn't able to be here. She did come to visit, just when he was still healthy, just a month ago, and so she got to see him, and they got to talk on the phone, the night before he died. So she said, Oh my goodness.
Excuse me.
So much for the Atlas chairs, Kevin.
Are you all right?
I'm going to need some ice.
Sorry, Paul.
Oh, it's all right. I think that chair needs it.
Bruce, pretty good.
Oh, so sorry.
It's all right. Oh, a screw.
Screws came out, yeah.
Yeah, technical details are important. But she sent me a recap. We all know that he came, to the Monterey Peninsula, and he started with a newspaper, and he did a lot of interesting things with the newspaper. He actually, I like to think that the Army brought him here. The Army saved him from a life in the clergy. He was actually heading towards the monastery when he was drafted. And he was in the Army for 5-6 years, and I like to think that my mom saved him from the Army. Worked out nicely for me, my brother, and my sister. But what happened before then? Well, Russell Lynn Cain was born on September 22nd to Michael Lindo Cain and Gladys Dell Livingston, I presume, and in Summer, Washington. Mitchell, his father, was currently in the Army, serving in Germany as a medical aide. He was discharged in 1944, and which enabled him to live his final years. He only died a few years ago in a Veterans Pioneer home in Washington. So his sister was born Dad was born in 42. His baby sister was born in 1944, Gloria, and she's writing this. When our father was in the service, he started an act as a magician playing USO shows. After his discharge, 4 of us traveled in an old converted milk truck. Before his dad was in the Army, he was a milkman. And he converted his milk truck to a traveling vaudeville wagon. And they traveled. It was the Great Cain and the, Great Cain and the Queen of Magic. Anyway, the truck was converted into a couple of bunk beds for us kids. Gloria always slept, but not Dad. He always stood behind the front seats and talked and was afraid he'd miss something if he closed his eyes. We traveled like that until Russ was of the age to start first grade. At that time, we went to live with Mitchell's parents, who lived on the family farm above Sumner. So Dad actually had a rural upbringing. He would actually drive a mule train and herd cattle and things that I would never have suspected him to do. It's a far cry from websites and content management. Our parents left us and continued their lives as magicians and traveled the U.S. doing magic shows. They seemed to like living together with their grandparents. The house had no indoor plumbing, but the barn had cows, sheep, rabbits, and chickens. My grandfather, Lendo Cain, and his wife, Lillian Cain, moved sometime the next year to Tacoma, Washington, to a larger home. And Dad lived in Tacoma until he came out here. Russell and I lived on their sun porch with some uncles. So when Gloria was ready for kindergarten, the grandparents couldn't take care of them anymore. So they found a home in Tacoma that boarded children, a foster home. Most of the children that were boarded were welfare children there. There were 3 rooms in the basement that held bunk beds. The large room in the basement held a bar area, a sink, and that's where they fixed our meals. There was a large bathroom in the room Russell liked because it had a swing set. It was surrounded by a white fence. There was also an upright piano. They had a large backyard connected to a large field with lots and lots of berry bushes to crawl under and explore. Lots of trees and an old building filled with all sorts of things to make believe with. The family we lived with were Alex and Al. We called Al Daddy Al. They had 3 children, and let's see, there was a definite barrier between them. They lived, my dad and Gloria lived and basically stayed downstairs, while the 3 natural children stayed upstairs. In the later years, Barry would come downstairs and play with us. Not only were the boarded children there, but there were lots and lots of daycare children. Anyway, the basement area had lots of noisy kids. Our school's about 6 or 7 blocks away, and everyone walked. Sometimes in kindergarten, Russell remembered vividly, we had an earthquake. I believe it was 1949. It damaged our school, so it was closed for repairs, and we all bused to part of Tacoma. I think they built a whole new school called Whitman Elementary. I remember not liking the central area school, but Russ adapted well. And she goes on to say how they would go by the train yard, and that really kindled Dad's love of trains. And he eventually, sometimes on the weekends, they would say, you know, Dad would get to choose, where are we going to go spend the weekend? And he would always say, the train yard. And eventually they weren't really into going to the train yard, but he would find his own way there. And the engineers got to know him. And he actually got to bum rides on switchers and catch a train across town in the cab of the locomotive. And when the trains would go by, the engineers would recognize Dad and would toot the horn. So back in his room at Alice's, he started to buy model trains and model train sets. He purchased some plywood and built a platform to cover his room wall to wall. Under the wood was his bed and his dresser. He cut a hole in the middle of the room so he could stand up. He worked on the train all the time, and he made all the parts. It was really something for a young person to do. Sometime later, he started dividing his time between going to the train yards and going to different churches. He would choose a different one each week, and he would visit it. He would tell me all about the architecture, and we would walk the grounds. Later on in our lives, he would come for a visit, and we would go look at the old buildings. I loved going with him and looking. He had no idea just what I saw, but it was fun. Although my brother was great and could do anything, and I loved living there with him, even though at school, when he saw me, ignored me. I lived there until I finished 9 and I went to live with my mother and stepfather in Sitka, Alaska, and wanted to come live with them there. So they split up for a while. She returned to Tacoma later on to live with Alice. And let's see here. Catch the good stuff. We all live different childhoods, but I think some are harder than others. My brother was kind of made into a loner. It seemed to me he had to struggle for what he had, but turned out to be a great man. He read a lot and was very accomplished. He tried to get me to read great books or see movies he loved. I always wanted to go to the opera with him, but it just never worked out. He was so happy with his grandchildren. He always told me about them when we called each other. Also, his 3 children were the light of his life, and I believe in a lot of ways they're just like their father in all the areas of their lives. I hope you remember just how much your father loved you. Your mother, Nita, was also a huge part of his life. Even though living apart, just think of all they did together. Nita meant a lot to him. Keep loving your father's memory. Thank you.
Well, thank you all. Sorry about the minor accident there. If anybody else would like to come up and say anything, Aiden, I know you wanted to. No pressure. No pressure. So, thank you.
My name is Louis Leader, and had the pleasure of working with Russ at the Herald for 18 years. See this pin I'm wearing? Mm-hmm. Alex, what's the pin stand for?
It's our first contract.
It's our first contract, Halloween 1973. And the contract was signed that day. It's always been, Halloween's always was a special guild holiday. I came to the Herald in '72. Russ was the old guy then. He was 29. I was 24. And the Herald was not bad management. It was just erratic management. It was inconsistent. And also, Monterey was a very conservative town then. And somebody once took me aside and said, you know what this town needs? It needs 10 important funerals. And eventually those 10 important funerals came, and the town moved into a different mindset. Russ and I, and a woman named Alice Burton, is Alice here? I'm sorry, she's not. We were the nominal initial committee, and I was the nominal chair of the first negotiating committee, but Russ was the guy who did all the work. And Carl's description of Russ going, oh, that's okay, that's okay. You couldn't do something for Russ. He would say, that's okay, don't worry about it, it's fine. And that was kind of indicative of his modesty and the way he conducted himself. Well, we started a card signing drive, and it really took off tremendously. And Monterey was not a big union town then. It just really wasn't. And we got the card signed, and we got the vote to unionize, and we were kind of nervous, but as I realized later, and I'll explain why, not as nervous as management was. The first 12 votes that were counted in the cafeteria, dining room, whatever you call it was a dump, at the Herald, the Pacific, and Jefferson, was 6 votes for the union and 6 votes against the union. And we were really starting to sweat. And then I think the next 19 votes were for union. And as each one was yes, 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 Russ and I and Alice and probably Alex Shulenicki and a few others just sat there trying to keep the smiles off our faces, and Sheila Davis. And each time management sunk deeper and deeper into the chair. The vote was something like 76 to 17 to unionize, which was just unbelievable. And then we set out with the hard task of getting that initial contract, and we persevered. And Russ was just tireless. I mean, I'm kind of glad I was single then, because as much time as I spent with Russ, I would have gotten divorced by the time that contract was negotiated. we got the contract. The union said it was the best initial contract in labor guild history, and we were damn proud of it. And then we began to enact the provisions of it, and it was a hell of a good contract because the Herald was all over the board. Some people were getting $7 a week for auto, some people were getting 17, some of the artists were making 110, some were making 190. And there was a guy upstairs who you were instructed at Christmas, if you got any bottles of booze, you took them up to him. You know, so that in those days, journalists accepted stuff. We then did a second contract, and it was also a good contract. I think we had to take a strike authorization vote each time, but there were two good contracts. And then I left. I was a reporter in San Francisco for a number of years, and I came back in management. Well, it was difficult for me because my sympathy was labor. I had been raised in a very strong union family, and my sympathies were with labor. And but I was now the city editor, and there's a joke about newsrooms that the assistant city editor is a mouse training to become a rat. So the city editor, you know where that is. So there were two people besides Russ who were incredibly instrumental for me and inspirational, and that was Gene Bryant and Bill Davis. I learned more from Gene Bryant and Bill Davis, who were the guild organizers, than I probably learned from anybody. And they were my mentors, and it was just wonderful, and they would come down here all the time. And then lo and behold, I'm sitting on the opposite side of the table, Gene Bryant and Bill Davis and Russ Cain in a contract in the 80s. And that was not comfortable. But Russ comported himself in the same honest, straightforward, ethical, honest, integrity-driven way that he did. And I was so pleased when we signed that contract. I was probably more pleased with that than when we signed the initial contract. And Russ was there all along, and it was just difficult for me. In hindsight, the block management, the people who owned the paper, were not bad people. They were a little inconsistent. They were somewhat erratic. But Scripps Howard took over, and I said, goodbye, Monterey Herald. And I resigned my position. I was then associate editor. And unfortunately, that was the string of owners that I just don't think served that newspaper or its people or its management or its labor very well. And then I moved on. And one of the ironic things was when I was in management, I would get teased by some of the higher people in management who would say, Lou, if we didn't have this in the contract, we could bring someone back in after 10 hours for another shift. And I say, no, you can't. So it was that type of stuff that was good, and it was a good marriage then between labor and management. I went on in management elsewhere, and I left the Herald for the second and final time in '94, and I was in management in various newspapers for about 15 years. But those years I spent at the Herald, when we organized that guild, the excitement, the spirit, the camaraderie, the family atmosphere that newspaper had. I knew people in every part of that newspaper, and they knew me. Advertising, circulation, the press room, the printers. We used to get together for dinner on Friday when the last presses stopped. It was Friday afternoon, and we'd go and we'd have dinner in various places. They were really very special, and Russ was a gem of a person. I never heard Russ complain. We would have to sit down. I would be management, he'd be labor. It was always we could reach a happy mutual resolution, and that's the way it should be in union management negotiations. And God knows we don't have that often anymore. And I just think, in closing, I think there's something apropos that at about the time Russ passed away, the Herald took its final step to abandoning the plant in Ryan Ranch, which was such an exciting day when we moved there. The presses moved in '88, and the news and the advertising operations moved in '90. So it was almost like they were saying, you know what, we can't do this if Russ is alive. And it was like the timing of those two events, I don't think were coincidental. Russ, God bless you, and it was wonderful to know you.
Thank you so much. If there's anybody else that wants to say anything, please feel free. Otherwise, we can adjourn to refreshments and shade. I think that the legacy that I will take with me from my dad was he never did anything half-ass. He just went through, he did it all, finished it, did it the best he could, and that's what I hope to have as my legacy and my children's legacy. And I appreciate you all for being here. I know he would have appreciated it, even though he pretended and scowled, and but he would have really, really enjoyed this. Thank you all.